Once again, survival horror brings us face to face with our worst nightmares, as we struggle to survive long enough to see another dawn. Good day everyone, my name is True Warrior, and today, I'll be talking about Resident Evil Requiem. Nearly 5 years after the release of Resident Evil Village, Capcom returns to continue the Resident Evil timeline, this time under the name of Resident Evil Requiem, a game that personally I've been really excited for, not only because it allows us to return to a raccoon city that now lies in ruins, but also because it possibly revisits and expands upon the events of Resident Evil Outbreak. This continuation doesn't just focus on one of the most important characters, Alyssa Ashcroft, but also formally introduces her daughter, Grace Ashcroft, who joins the story as a new protagonist. On the other hand, during the Game Awards, or rather, thanks to the leaks Sony accidentally revealed, it was announced that one of the saga's veteran characters would have a major role as the second protagonist of the game, Leon S. Kennedy. When I first heard this, I'll admit I was a bit worried. I feel like Leon tends to steal the spotlight from other characters whether he shares the screen with them. However, it's also true that we haven't had an update on Leon in the mainline game since Resident Evil 6. And then I thought, you know what? We already got an update on Chris Field, so I think it's only fair we find out what's been going on with Leon, who is now 49 years old. Another aspect that really caught my attention was an interview published by Famitsu, brought to us thanks to the user Sapphire Weapon, who translated a conversation between Koshi Nakanishi and Masato Kumasawa. In that discussion, Nakanishi references something like a Pandora's box and mentions that Leon is hiding a secret related to Alyssa's death. Could it have something to do with the mark on Leon's neck? Well then, today we're gonna unravel all these mysteries and much more, diving deep into the story of Resident Evil Requiem, analyzing its gameplay, and sharing my personal thoughts. As usual on this channel, this video contains major story spoilers, so if you haven't played Resident Evil Requiem yet, proceed at your own risk. With that being said, let us begin. The story begins at the FBI building where Grace Ashcroft, an analyst, receives orders from her superior, Nathan Dempsey, to investigate a body found at the Wrenwood Hotel, the same place where her mother, Alyssa Ashcroft, died 8 years ago. Upon arriving at the crime scene, Officer Norman Cole leads her through the alley that connects to the hotel. Inside one of the rooms, Grace finds several photographs placed on the bed. In them, she appears alongside her mother, but one image in particular paralyzes her. A photo of herself, alone, taken 8 years ago when they stayed in the very same room. The game then transports us 8 years ago, where Grace answers a call from a stranger asking for Miss Ashcroft before abruptly hanging up. Shortly after, a blackout plunges the building into darkness. Alyssa, visibly shaken, tries to stay calm while deciding to escape with Grace. During their attempt, they encounter the hotel manager who is brutally murdered by a hooded man who slashes his throat. Alyssa fires back at the attacker and, in the chaos, quickly hides a folder containing crucial information behind a painting. Panicking, Grace tries to call the police and suffers a panic attack. Alyssa comforts her, promising to explain everything, calling her her hope through tears. However, before they can escape, the hooded man reappears and kills Alyssa with a machete to the neck. Moments later, due to the gunshot wound Alyssa inflicted, the attacker collapses dead, triggering a fire that consumes the hotel. Grace, devastated and deeply traumatized, manages to escape the burning building, forever marked by her mother's death. Maybe it's too early to praise the actors, but I have to applaud this scene. The BA for Grace did an incredible job, where you can truly feel Grace's pain as she mourns her mother after their final embrace and exchange of love.
Mom! あ 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 Mom! あ
After reliving her past, Grace remembers her mother's words and the folder she hid back then. Although I'm not entirely sure how that folder stayed in the same place after 8 years, Grace manages to recover it. Inside, she finds Alyssa's journal where she describes being wanted by a hooded man, as if they were following her. There's also a disc whose contents remain unknown for now. After finishing reading her mother's report, Officer Cole reappears in front of her, but to Grace's horror, he mutates into a zombie after being bitten in the neck. In her attempt to escape, Grace gets trapped in a luggage car while the officer tries to kill her with a shotgun. Grace manages to escape and runs to the second floor. However, she is stabbed and bitten on the forearm before using a piece of glass to push Cole outside, killing him in the process. Hearing music upstairs, Grace encounters a man sitting by a fireplace. Victor Gideon, a former Umbrella researcher who worked on the development of the T-virus. Victor confesses that he placed the body at the crime scene to lure her and claims that she is the chosen one. Grace tries to escape, but Victor strangles her and leaves her unconscious, transporting her to the Roll Hill Chronic Care Center, where he plans to conduct further experiments. Moments later, Grace wakes up tied to a stretcher and immediately starts calling for help. However, after taking a moment to calm down and thanks to her quick thinking, she manages to free herself and begins exploring the facility. Just like in Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake, the game introduces a stealth section where Grace must find the fuse to open a door while avoiding this game's stalker, known as the Girl, a tall, grotesque being that appears to be affected by light. Meanwhile, outside the facility, Leon S. Kennedy arrives at the main entrance, with the help of Sherry Birkin, who temporarily replaces Ingrid Hunnigan as his operations coordinator. They decide to investigate Victor. Upon entering, a nurse guides Leon to the examination wing and tells him to wait. However, unknown to Leon, Victor is watching him and activates an emergency protocol. The nurse returns and tells him to evacuate, claiming that both patients and staff have been infected. Moments later, the nurse is brutally killed by a doctor wielding a chainsaw, forcing Leon to fight off the infected.
I think I want a second opinion.
And this is where Capcom shows us some of the most intense gameplay they ever created for Resident Evil. Leon, channeling the energy of both John Wick and Jason Bourne, showcases his years of experience fighting bioorganic weapons. I swear, Resident Evil has never felt this brutal and grotesque. The kills almost feel like Mortal Kombat fatalities, Leon decapitating enemies, crushing them, blowing their heads off. And the best part? This game lets you use a chainsaw against zombies. And not just the kills, his deaths are just as brutal. While recording the video, one zombie with a chainsaw did something I did not expect. Unfortunately, nothing lasts forever and we eventually leave the chainsaw behind after opening a door.
It's been a long day without you, my friend.
Once Leon clears the horde, he navigates the corridors until he encounters Grace, who is being dragged by the girl. He manages to free her by blowing the creature's head off. But before they can escape, Victor activates a lockdown protocol separating Leon and Grace. Just before the gates close completely, Leon hands Grace the Requiem and tells her to find a way out. Leon remains behind in the dark hallway where he encounters Victor. Victor easily overpowers him, strangling him unconscious after Leon naively tries to attack him. After trying to punch guys like Mr. X and Vitores Mendez and failing in the process, you really thought you could take Victor? Something that caught my attention when Grace was dragged by the girl is how much it reminded me of Resident Evil 2 Remake, when a zombie tries to drag Leon down a hallway until Marvin saves him. It feels like the roles were reversed, with Leon now walking in his lieutenant's footsteps. Anyway, while Leon is getting absolutely destroyed, Grace continues exploring on her own. During her journey, she finds a dying man who warns her about a blind girl named Emily locked in a cell. When Grace tries to communicate with her, she discovers that Emily had a cellmate named Marie, a girl who eventually mutated into a creature stalking the halls. To escape the facility and help Emily, Grace must collect 3 course pieces. And while exploring, she also unlocks a key game mechanic, the Blood Extractor. Similar to the Genesis device in Resident Evil Revelations, it allows Grace to collect blood samples from enemies and the environment, combining them with scrap to craft items. One of the most useful tools in the game is the hemolytic injector. And let me just say it right now, Resident Evil Requiem has one of the most diverse enemy rosters in the franchise, and many of them are extremely annoying, making the injector essential. For example, there are giant enemies that look like they came out of Little Nightmares, and besides regular zombies, there's an upgraded variant, the Blister Heads. For those who played the original Resident Evil, you remember the Crimson Heads, zombies that revive if you don't burn their bodies. The Blister Heads are basically the same concept, except instead of burning them, Grace uses the hemolytic injector. Meanwhile, Leon... well, he doesn't really have a problem dealing with them. While researching for the bracelet, Grace encounters Victor again and asks him why he kidnapped her.
Why did you kidnap me?
Through you, Elpis can finally be set free.
Why me?
Because my master made you who you are.
Fearing being captured again, Grace escapes and locks the door with a chair. Thinking quickly, she pretends to flee by opening a door and hiding nearby. Victor tries to intimidate her into revealing her location but fails and eventually leaves the room.
Grace!
After she's gone, Grace retrieves the second course from a safe and discovers Victor's notes. In them, he describes research of the T-virus and reveals that none other than Oswald E. Spencer, one of Umbrella's founders, is his master. Who would have thought that the student of Mother Miranda would find his own disciple? Or rather, an admirer. Upon reaching the security office, Grace finds the manager's body and his safe containing the final quartz. However, the puzzle can only be read in Braille, so she returns to free Emily and have her input the code. They both return and Grace carries Emily to safety. While they attempt to solve the puzzle, infected patients begin approaching them, leaving Emily in the office while Grace deals with the zombies. Emily manages to solve the puzzle but is immediately taken to the basement by the girl. Despite her fear, Grace chases after them. Meanwhile, Leon wakes up tied to a chair while Victor interrogates him and slowly strokes him.
You know, I do have a question. When's the last time you brushed your teeth?
I'm sure quite a few women and some men would have wanted to be in Victor's shoes at that moment. After Leon mocks Victor's teeth, Victor prepares to torture him, but Leon frees himself and tries to attack, resulting in Victor escaping. Re-establishing contact with Sherry, Leon heads to Victor's office. There, he deliberately enters an incorrect password, allowing Sherry to hack the system. Among the data, there's a reference to Elpis and a photo to Grace, making Leon question her involvement. They also discover Raccoon City Syndrome, a condition affecting survivors of the outbreak due to lingering T-virus residue. To Leon's horror, Sherry confirms that both of them are infected. Interestingly, this symptom may have existed long before Requiem, and Resident Evil 3 Remake A report mentions that survivors of the Spencer Mansion incident hadn't shown symptoms yet, leaving it unclear whether it was due to a long incubation or resistance. Aside from Leon and Sherry, it is unknown if other characters are affected. The only confirmed vaccinated character so far is Jill Valentine, thanks to Colors Oliveira saving her after her infection. Now I see why Capcom recommended playing RE2 and RE3 Remake before Requiem. Back in the basement, Grace is chased by the girl while trying to rescue Emily. After restoring power, she unlocks Emily's cell but also releases the zombies. Carrying Emily, she runs to the elevator while being chased by the girl who even climbs onto the elevator roof. As they reach the ground floor, Grace opens the door open, helping Emily out first. But the girl grabs Grace's leg, trying to drag her back in. Suddenly, the elevator cable snaps, sending the girl falling into the abyss, with her arm severed in the process. I want to highlight two things here. First, I genuinely thought Grace was about to lose her leg. The setup had me convinced until I saw the girl's arm. Good fake out, Capcom. Second, we see growth in Grace and Emily's relationship. At first, Grace struggles to communicate with her, but over time, she opens up, eventually returning Emily's hug with genuine warmth and embrace. With the stray quartz pieces finally in hand and placed into the main door, Grace and Emily finally manage to escape the care center. Once they reach the courtyard, they encounter Harry Reid, a pilot who offered to protect Emily and fly them out of the facility by helicopter in exchange for Grace retrieving the aircraft's key, which had been confiscated by his employers. At first, Grace hesitated to trust Harry, believing he might betray her, and honestly, I can't blame her considering they were trapped in the middle of an outbreak. But with no other option and wanting to protect Emily, she ultimately accepted the deal and headed towards the cabin near the helipad. To her surprise, she discovered a hidden underground laboratory beneath the area, where countless patients had been used in experiments involving her blood. There, Grace overheard Victor communicating with someone known as Zeno.
Yes, Zeno, that's correct. All tests have come back positive. I can confirm that she is indeed the one that we've been searching for. If all goes as planned, Elpis will soon be in our hands. Of course. But first, I must initiate the protocol. I've done it. I've done it. I've done it.
Grace fought desperately to escape and return to the surface, now carrying the helicopter key in her hand. She urged Harry to take off immediately as hordes of zombies began closing in. Unfortunately, the helicopter lifted up too late, with zombies smashing through the front windshield and swarmed the aircraft. Forced into the co-pilot seat, Grace tries to regain control of the helicopter, which was already spiraling out of control, but they ultimately crashed into the cemetery. The impact killed Harry and left Emily critically injured. Grace manages to free her and the two fled towards the chapel while the cemetery gets filled with zombies drawn by the crash. Luckily for Grace and Emily, Leon witnessed the helicopter crash and grabbed a rifle to provide cover from a distance while they ran towards the chapel. After they managed to get inside and after Leon absolutely horrified a zombie's skull, he reunited with Grace, who was desperately trying to stop Emily's bleeding. With the chapel surrounded by zombies, Leon instructed Grace to head towards the water treatment plant, while he stayed behind to hold off the creatures and buy enough time for Grace and Emily to escape. Upon reaching the treatment plant, Grace was stalked by the girl once again. Fearing for Emily's safety, she decided to leave her somewhere secure. Realizing the creature's weakness, Grace manually opened the rooftop hatch, flooding the entire area with light and literally melting the girl into puddles.
Hey, Queenie! Feast on this!
After dealing with the creature, Grace returned to Emily only to discover that the girl had stopped breathing. In a desperate attempt to save her, Grace performed CPR, but Emily suddenly began convulsing in agony before mutating uncontrollably due to a dormant T-virus inside her. Grace desperately pleaded to the mutated Emily, but despite her screams and protests, Leon was forced to put the girl down. Completely devastated, Grace broke down crying over Emily's body, blaming herself for the tragedy. Despite Leon's attempts to comfort her, Grace handed the Requiem back to him and walked away. Aimlessly wandering towards the exit, Grace encountered Victor, who introduced her to his employer, Zeno. He explained that she was the key to unlocking Elpis, a project capable of changing the entire world. Hoping to finally learn the truth about what Elpis is, Grace agreed to accompany Victor and Zeno by helicopter to the ruins of Raccoon City. Something that really stood out to me in the scene was Grace's reaction after Emily's death.
No, I never would have escaped without her. This is all my fault. Again.
The emotional weight behind that final word says everything. This wasn't recent pain, it was more like guilt she had been carrying for years. It all began with her mother's death, an event that deeply traumatized Grace to the point where she blamed herself for what happened. But her struggles go even further than that. Alyssa's diary mentions that Grace has difficulty making friends, and this detail is reinforced by one of the documents found in Rose Hill, which explains that Grace spends most of her free time alone and isolated from other people. Now imagine living most of your life in loneliness only for someone to finally bring a little bit of light into your world, just to have that light ripped away from you in the cruelest way imaginable. When that happens, it becomes painfully easy to understand why someone might feel like there's nothing left worth fighting for anymore, like they just want to give up. And honestly, I think that was the exact emotional state Grace had fallen into that moment. Another thing I want to point out is that, judging by the reactions I've seen from other content creators of both Twitch and YouTube, I'm glad I wasn't the only person who immediately saw this guy was Wesker the moment he appeared on screen. I mean, not only does he share the same voice actor from RE4R, but he's practically a straight up copy from the character. The outfit, the face, the hair, even the abilities he shows later on. Didn't know Temu was selling Albert Wesker knockoffs now. Determined to save Grace and uncover why she was connected to Elpis, Leon headed towards the ruins of Raccoon City. On the way there, Sherry contacted Leon and informed him that Elpis was neither documented nor mentioned anywhere within the CIA or Pentagon servers. When she requested a higher clearance level, she was immediately ordered to terminate the investigation. Leon was confused by the sudden interference but warned her not to risk disciplinary action or legal consequences. Even so, Sherry refused to back down, insisting that she would continue helping him no matter what happened. While traveling through eastern Raccoon City, Leon battles a gigantic spider known as the Titan Spinner before continuing onward. This thing on Insanity difficulty is an absolute tank. You waste an absurd amount of ammo just trying to kill it. And to make matters worse, it keeps throwing its offsprings at you while the mother tries to crush you. So for all those arachnophobes who managed to get through this section, I genuinely salute you. And for those who couldn't, well... After exterminating the giant spider, Leon arrives at a BSAA block gate that requires a detonator to destroy. While searching for detonators to blow up the gate, Leon finds the corpse of a BSAA soldier and recovers footage from a man's body camera. The recording shows Zeno brutally slaughtering several soldiers. And to Leon's surprise, he discovers that Zeno is practically a ghost with no public records of his existence anywhere. After assembling the series detonator components, Leon blows open the gate and picks up a nearby motorcycle, courtesy of the BSAA, to reach downtown Raccoon City. On the highway, Leon is pursued by several Garm creatures as well as Vector himself, who wields a rocket launcher in an attempt to kill him. I don't know about you guys, but this entire sequence feels straight out of Resident Evil Vendetta. From the highway setting to the docks causing completely unnecessary destruction. As if Leon hadn't already been aura farming the entire game, he suddenly starts pulling off acrobatics and fighting Victor on motorcycles while exchanging gunfire. Eventually, Leon manages to rupture Victor's fuel tank and ignites the motorcycle, sending Victor plummeting into the abyss as an explosion erupts behind them. And naturally, Leon still finds time to mock him afterward.
Should've worn a helmet.
I mean, he's not wrong. Safety first, people. Also, if Capcom ever decides to make another game starring Claire Redfield, the first Resident Evil protagonist to ride a motorcycle, please give her a sequence like this too. After dealing with Victor, Leon continued towards the Raccoon City Police Department, which the BSAA had been using as their primary headquarters. And ladies and gentlemen, I have to make a confession. I almost cried when I reached this section. The moment I stepped into the police station and heard the bells from the original RE2 soundtrack, I was genuinely on the verge of getting emotional. Let me tell you something about myself. I'm not a veteran of these games. I actually started my journey with Resident Evil around 2018 or 2019. I didn't grow up with the originals and my childhood wasn't tied to Resident Evil at all. And yet, I still remember so many moments of the first time I played these classics, especially the first time I arrived at the RPD in the original RE2. When I saw flashbacks to RE2R with Marvin and the game introduced us to the ruined RPD, I was instantly reminded that this was where Leon, Claire, Ada, and Sherry's stories first began. This entire section was fan service done right. Every corner of the station brought back memories of past games and characters. The items in the store's office, the officer's decks, Rebecca's photograph, which I still have no idea how it survived after the city exploded into a million pieces, and they even included tofu. But the thing that surprised me the most was a puzzle that Barry Burton had left behind for his teammates. Like, they actually remembered My Boy in 2026. If the devs' goal was to take players on a nostalgia trip, then congratulations. They absolutely nailed it. Well, getting back to the story, after finding a computer terminal, Leon discovered that Grace and Zeno were speaking in the East Wing. Upon reaching their location, Leon secretly listened in to their conversation. During it, Grace learned that Elpis was the final virus created by Spencer, designed for the purpose of mind control while exploiting its infectious capabilities. Zeno explained that when the Raccoon City outbreak occurred, the connections could not allow Elpis to be stolen. So they pressured the US government into carrying out a sterilization strategy, not only to contain the outbreak, but also to conceal Elpis's very existence.
Hide a virus. Why do something so extreme?
Extreme? Is it? When the president tried to investigate, they had him assassinated. And you are the key to retrieving Elpis.
As for that last detail, when Zeno mentioned the assassination of the president, he was referring to President Adam Benford from Resident Evil 6. In one of the game's flashbacks, Benford stated that he intended to reveal the truth behind what happened in Raccoon City, possibly even exposing the existence of Elpis itself. Because of this, there's a theory that his knowledge of Elpis was the real reason he was assassinated. If that turns out to be true, then honestly, despite Capcom's tendency to leave plot holes here and there, I genuinely love the fact that the writers added another layer to the destruction of Raccoon City. On top of that, throughout a computer monitor, Zeno showed Grace a photograph of a little girl who, to her shock, was not Emily, but rather a clone of Grace herself named Chloe. And she wasn't the only one. Numerous clones had been created afterward in an attempt to replicate her, the original successful clone. Afterward, the game jumps back approximately 36 years, showing Chloe wandering through the Raccoon City orphanage while watching her friends, the series' 60 children, lose control and slaughter Umbrella researchers and nurses. Eventually, Chloe accidentally wandered into Ark, where she discovered the truth about her origins. She had been created as a baby inside a test tube. Shortly afterward, she was restrained by a researcher and later killed after beginning to show symptoms. After witnessing these recordings, Grace was left completely horrified and overwhelmed at the thought that she may have been responsible for countless deaths in the pursuit of unlocking Elpis. Leon intervened, but Zeno summoned the T-501 to stop him, while he carried Grace's unconscious body deeper into Ark. Before continuing, I want to point out something important about the scene. Right before fainting, Grace says something very important to Leon. Okay, Grace, I know Leon looks good for a 49-year-old man, but at first, I didn't fully understand the context behind Grace's reaction. However, I came across a user whose perspective on the scene I found extremely interesting. A content creator named David Vallejo, also known as PsychoSenG. And by the way, for those who understand Spanish, I genuinely recommend checking out his YouTube channel. Using his background in psychology, David gives a detailed explanation of the trauma Grace experiences after learning the truth about her past. When Zeno reveals this information, the mind begins processing something deeply destabilizing: the collapse in our personal narrative. Our identities are built around a coherent story about who we are, where we come from, and which experiences shaped our lives. When that story suddenly shatters, the brain can enter a state of intense emotional and cognitive overload. At that moment, Leon's appearance acts as a final trigger. After receiving a revelation that completely destabilizes her sense of self, Grace suddenly finds herself standing before someone who may represent safety or protection. When a person reaches extreme levels of stress, the brain can activate primitive attachment responses. That is why when Grace says, "Mom," she's not necessarily calling out to her mother specifically. Rather, her mind is reacting for the most basic form of protection and comfort it recognizes. The fainting afterward also has a plausible explanation. During moments of severe psychological shock, some people experience what is known as a stress-induced collapse. In this process, the nervous system becomes overloaded, causing a sudden drop in blood pressure and bodily activation. Put simply, the brain temporarily shuts the system down in order to prevent an even greater overload. Honestly, it's impressive that someone took the time to explain all of this, and at the end, I actually kind of learned something from it. After escaping the tyrant's pursuit, Leon leaves the RPD and comes across the ruins of Robert Kendall's gun shop. Upon opening the storage room where Kendall once protected his daughter Emma, Leon begins remembering the moment where he and Ada spoke with Kendall while he desperately tried to protect his child. Even though the RPD section was overflowing with nostalgia, it also served as a reminder of Leon's true reason for fighting bioterrorism: to prevent tragedies like what happened to Kendall, his daughter, and so many other victims of Umbrella from ever happening again. After returning to the outskirts of Raccoon City, Leon encounters the tyrant once more, who fires a missile directly at him. The explosion sends Leon flying through the air before crashing into a car. With now a rocket launcher in hand, the tyrant prepares to deliver the killing blow, but before he can fire, Leon reacts quickly and opens fire, causing the projectile to explode directly in the tyrant's face. The blast burns away his trench coat, revealing his true form: the Super Tyrant. Much like Mr. X, he can charge at Leon and impale him with his claw for devastating damage. However, unlike his predecessor, this version can also hurl cars as weapons. Honestly, it feels poetic that the RPD section ends up with a battle against the very same tyrant model that once hunted Leon back in RE2. Once Leon finally defeats the super tyrant, he heads towards the Raccoon City orphanage, which serves as the entrance to Ark, an umbrella laboratory hidden beneath Raccoon City. Leon ventures inside and explores the facility until he reaches Pandora, the chamber where Elpis was being kept, where he also finds Grace and Zeno. However, he is quickly intercepted by soldiers from the Connections, who he dispatches without much trouble. But his next opponent is on an entirely different level for the rest of the soldiers, coming face to face with the squad commander himself. And yes, the man you are seeing here on screen is the Grim Reaper, Hunk. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the first time we've ever had this legend appear as an actual boss fight in an RE game, without relying on backup from his soldiers and instead fighting Leon one-on-one. I'm going to admit that this fight took me hours to beat, mostly because I couldn't understand his attack patterns at first until I started paying attention to the grunts he makes during combat, which actually gives you clues about when to counterattack and what move he's about to use against Leon. On top of that, this fight reminded me a lot of Krauser's battle in RE4. Two men fighting hand to hand, axe against axe, two Resident Evil icons clashing against each other. But like every fight, eventually someone has to fall. And in this case, that someone was Hunk after Leon slit his throat with an axe. An interesting detail about this battle is that after defeating Hunk and leaving the area, if the player returns shortly afterward, Hunk's body is gone. Did the Grim Reaper cheat death itself? Another detail I want to highlight is that while exploring the halls of Ark, Leon comes across a catalog listing the various bioorganic weapons, complete with brief descriptions and their values on the black market. What makes this especially interesting is that the catalog includes every BOW encounters throughout the story, all except one, the Nemesis Gamma, which the game describes as an improved version of the creature from RE3. After defeating Hunk, Leon enters Pandora where Grace and Zeno are awaiting. Zeno explains that Elpis is still behind the password and Grace is the key needed to unlock it, despite the fact that even she herself does not know the password. Leon interrupts the situation and confronts Zeno directly, but he's quickly overwhelmed due to Zeno's incredible agility. Just before Leon can be killed, Grace threatens to take her own life, buying Leon enough time to shoot the cranes above and quickly grab onto her. Both of them fall into a waste disposal sector where Leon loses consciousness due to the progression of his syndrome. For hours, Grace remains by his side until Leon finally wakes up again. Now in the third stage of his condition, Grace realizes that Leon was one of the survivors of Raccoon City, and she asks him why he came all the way there despite his syndrome being so severe.
This place. Raccoon City was where it all began for me. Where it all happened, I couldn't make a difference. So I am here now.
Here.
I'm going back. I'm gonna destroy Elvis.
I'm coming with you.
No, you're not.
I don't want any more regrets.
Whatever it takes to save this city.
Count me in.
If anything happens to me, you promise you'll end this.
I promise.
Eventually, they come across a crane blocking their path, prompting Leon to boost Grace into another section of the facility, so she can clear the way for him. Grace then heads into the archives where she discovers multiple records about herself displayed across several monitors. After finding a slot similar to an MO disk drive, Grace inserts the disk she recovered from her mother's bag and uncovers an interview her mother conducted with Spencer after Umbrella's fall in 2004. To her surprise, Grace learns that she was not artificially created, but rather a naturally born child who had been adopted by Spencer and later entrusted to her mother through Spencer's own will. Finally, Spencer refers to Elpis as his final project, as his blind hope, believing it could serve as his redemption and a requiem for those who died. That revelation genuinely surprised me because Spencer was always portrayed himself as someone with a god complex, even during his final moments before Wesker killed him. Yet during Alyssa's interview, we see a man displaying vulnerability, regret for his actions, and even adopting a child, something completely different from the Spencer we thought we knew. Could Capcom possibly explore this side of him further in the future? Maybe in a remake? While Grace examined the discs, Leon made his way towards Pandora, already on the verge of death as his coughing became more severe. Eventually, he collapsed just outside the facility. Though the surveillance cameras, Grace noticed what happened and immediately rushed to help him, tending to his condition before the two of them returned to Pandora, where Zeno was already waiting for them. Leon offered to buy Grace enough time to enter an incorrect password and destroy Elpis once and for all. However, Grace proposed a different plan, and Leon placed his full trust in her decision. Standing before Zeno, Grace negotiated using Leon's wife as leverage in order to gain access to Elpis. She approached the terminal and asked, "What does the creator desire?" And this is where Capcom pulls another one of its signature moves. Much like in Resident Evil 7, where the player must make a crucial decision that determines one of two endings, the game once again presents the player with a major choice: either destroy Elpis or release it. And depending on that decision, the story branches into one of two possible endings. Starting with the bad ending where Elpis is destroyed, Zeno becomes enraged by Grace's decision and attempts to seize her by force. However, Leon manages to get back on his feet and buries his axe into Zeno's shoulder, freeing Grace in the process. Even in his weakened condition, Leon makes sure she can escape safely while he stays behind to confront Zeno as the Ark laboratory begins collapsing around him. The two engage in brutal hand-to-hand combat, but Leon's physical exhaustion and the progression of his syndrome finally catch up to him, leaving him completely overwhelmed by his opponent. To Grace's horror, Zeno ultimately blows Leon's head apart before falling alongside the destruction of Ark itself. Although Grace manages to escape alive, she is left mourning Leon's death, burdened by the guilt of being unable to save him. Before Requiem released, many people theorized that Leon was going to die because of his infection. But I keep telling myself, if Capcom didn't have the guts to kill Chris in Resident Evil 6, I highly doubt they'd kill off their golden boy. And yes, I know this ending isn't canon, but part of me genuinely feels like Capcom wanted to shut people like me up with this outcome. Now, moving on to the ending where Elpis is released, Zeno, blinded by arrogance and convinced Elpis was some kind of virus, injects himself with it in an attempt to demonstrate its power. However, the infection inside his body is immediately neutralized. Grace then explains that Elpis was never a virus at all, but rather an antiviral agent designed to neutralize any viral infection, which, according to her interpretation, was Spencer's attempt at redemption. Demanding answers, Zeno lashes out in confusion, but Leon charges at him and is thrown near Grace, who is still holding a vial containing Elpis. Shortly afterward, Victor arrives at the scene, completely fascinated by Spencer's genius. Furious over Victor's failed research, Zeno confronts him only for Victor to calmly explain that Spencer's thesis has been incomplete, and that the cloning experiments had absolutely no connection to Elpis. Grace and Emily, according to him, were entirely unrelated cases. Victor then declares that he alone will fulfill Spencer's true vision, using Elpis not as a weapon, but as a means to plunge the entire world into chaos and anarchy. In contrast, Zeno merely wanted to weaponize it from himself. Severing ties with him completely, Victor decapitates Zeno with his mutated arm after injecting himself with the knee gamma virus, before impaling Grace throughout the torso with one of his tentacles. After recovering a sample of Elpis, Victor proceeds to initiate the destruction of both Pandora and Ark. With the little time she had left, Grace uses Elpis to cure Leon of his syndrome. I want to take a moment to praise Anthony Byron's performance as Victor during this scene, because the way he delivered Victor's dialogue genuinely reminded me of Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight, a scientist completely consumed by obsession over Spencer's legacy.
We wanted a weapon.
Instead, Spencer gave us anarchy.
Spencer defied us and paid the price with his life. He was nothing.
You are nothing but an imitation.
Before playing Requiem, I honestly thought this was going to be another situation like Lady Dimitrescu in Village, where the heavily featured villain in the trailers dies very early in the game. But Victor suddenly reappears not only to completely humiliate Zeno, but also to establish a clear ideological contrast between the two characters. While this Wesker knockoff wanted Elpis purely for personal gain, Victor viewed it as a catalyst of something far greater: the collapse of the world order itself. The platform beneath them suddenly gave away, sending everyone crashing into the lower levels. Grace was knocked unconscious, leaving Leon to face Victor, or rather Dr. Octopus himself, before the creature plunged into the abyss with the power of the sun blazing behind him. But after falling, Victor mutates into a gigantic bioweapon whose form closely resembles Nemesis in his final stage. Remember that node that I was talking about earlier? Yeah, this is the Nemesis Gamma in the flesh.
Nemesis. No wonder you're so damn relentless.
And honestly, as much fan service as this final boss fight was, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed that it basically felt like a straight up copy from the final boss of RE3R. What didn't disappoint me, however, was the way Leon finally killed Victor. With absolutely zero fear, Leon slowly walks towards him, blasting off Victor's arms one by one before delivering the final blow.
This time, you ain't getting back up.
But despite Leon's victory, the battle leaves both of them trapped. Leon rushes over to Grace, who realizes there is no possible escape and simply resigns herself to her fate as the final light fades away around them. Fortunately, they are quickly rescued by Umber Eyes of the Hound Wolf Squad, who had been saved by his captain Chris Redfield after learning about Ark and Leon's involvement in the incident. Back on the surface, Leon admits that he finally feels better and assures Sherry that he managed to attain a sample capable of treating her syndrome. She thanks him, after which Leon approaches Grace, who still blames herself for Emily's death. Even so, Leon offers her a glimmer of hope, the possibility that Emily might still be alive, before leaving to be evacuated by the BSAA. Sometime later, Leon is informed that Grace officially adopted Emily, who had been found alive and cured of her condition. In return, Leon tells Grace that Sherry was also cured of her syndrome. And before the conversation can continue any further, Grace is forced to hang up after her boss asks her for her report, bringing the story to its conclusion. Moving on to the characters and the game's voice acting, we begin with Capcom's favorite golden boy, Leon S. Kennedy. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it does frustrate me a little that Capcom continues to give him more spotlight than other characters. But at the same time, Requiem reminded me exactly why this character remains so beloved by so many fans. Beyond his action hero persona and the sarcastic one-liners that not even Jill would probably tolerate, Leon is a man deeply haunted by his past. Throughout his journey, he has carried the weight of countless traumas, and Resident Evil Requiem does a fantastic job portraying the ghosts that still follow him. In fact, the Raccoon City incident scarred him so badly that, for those who may not know, one of the files in Resident Evil 6 reveals that Leon had contemplated taking his own life multiple times, only choosing to keep fighting for Sherry's sake. As for the voice acting, once again, Nick Apostolidis' performance knocks it out of the park. Every time he plays Leon, he manages to bring a completely different essence to the character. In Resident Evil 2 Remake, we see a young rookie cop on his very first day still filled with innocence.
I want to find out what's happening here and stop whoever's behind it. Helping people like them? That's why I joined the force.
Meanwhile, in Resident Evil 4 Remake, his voice carries the tone of someone far more hardened and emotionally scarred by the horrors of Raccoon City.
I have something to ask you. But I don't think I'll get a straight answer. Raccoon City. You know, after the incident, the world changed. You try to save one person, 100 others die. I guess I changed too.
For Resident Evil Requiem, the actor himself mentioned that he drew inspiration from an image of a wounded lion. A powerful, dangerous, and brutal figure driven purely by necessity. And honestly, you can feel that idea not only in his performance, but also in the way the character plays throughout the game. It's also worth mentioning that Nick has been a fan of Resident Evil since 1998, when he first played through the original RE2.
That you were playing Resident Evil 1, the first one, yeah? Was that on PS4? You were going back?
It's on PS4. I
Yep.
just, I picked it up a couple months ago, so I'm just revisiting that. And I dove in last night for about 4 or 5 hours. I played a little bit today, actually, and it just reminded me of like why I fell in love with the series way back when. The Save Room music, I'm gonna play that at my wedding. That will be my wedding song.
I don't doubt it,
Ladies,
man. So you obviously played the second one, the original Resident Evil 2.
That was the first one I ever played in '98. Mm-hmm.
Oh, you played it back in '98.
Yeah, that was the first
wow.
time I fell in love with Resident Evil. It was way back then. My mother wouldn't let me play the first one, and then 2 years later, I had to sleep over a friend's house to play the second one, and I slept over a bunch of nights, and we beat that shit. And ever since then, I was just like, this is my franchise.
Oh, man. I love that you're a gamer too, man. Because a lot of the times, the actors don't play or don't know much about it.
It makes a difference.
You reckon it does?
I reckon it does. And that's because you understand the universe, you understand the fandom, you understand how games typically work. Now, of course, you can just act and do a fantastic job. You don't have to be a gamer to be a great video game actor. But I'll tell you right now, my fandom helped me get this job. When I auditioned for RE2, I laid it all on the table. Even in my submission, they probably got about 2,000 submissions for Leon, maybe 5,000, I don't even know. And in my notes, I said, I'm a giant fan. I know all the characters. I know all the relationships. I know everything. You got to let me audition. They called me in, so I made that cut. And then I auditioned. I prepped the hell out of it. And I understood who Leon was. I understood his relationship with Ada and the other characters in Claire. So going in, I had a little edge. And I spoke with the director on set, in the audition room. And I said, listen, I'm laying it on the table. This is in my heart. I said, if you guys give me a chance, I will absolutely play a version of Leon that works, and I'll give you everything I got. I was so fucking dedicated.
Oh, I love
so
that,
does it
man.
make a difference? I think it does.
I mean, imagine getting the opportunity to portray your favorite character from a franchise you've loved since childhood. That's literally a dream come true. Another detail surrounding Leon that sparked a lot of controversy within the community is the whole ring situation. After speaking with Grace, there's a scene where Leon removes one of his gloves and pulls something out of his pocket, though the object itself is never directly shown on screen. However, if you look closely at the character's concept art, In the lower right corner, there's a sketch of his left hand wearing a ring on his ring finger. So, after all these years of constantly thinking about her, reuniting multiple times, and even sleeping together, something the director of Resident Evil Damnation himself confirmed, could it be that Leon and Ada Wong finally ended up together? One character whose return genuinely surprised me was Sherry Birkin. Not only does the game finally continue her storyline after Resident Evil 6, but they also brought back Eden Rigo from RE6 as well. Much like Leon, Sherry's concept art also shows a ring on a pinky finger, which I honestly don't understand why so many people immediately interpret it as proof that she and Leon ended up together, when the games have never portrayed any romantic tension between them. Not to mention, Sherry first met Liam when she was literally just a child, while this man already had hair between his legs. One thing that genuinely bothered me about Sherry and Requiem is that she never once mentions Claire Redfield. Like seriously, Capcom, the cards were right there in your hands. The story literally returns on RPD, the place where the story of those three characters began, and Sherry doesn't even acknowledge the person who saved her life, protected her while she was under Derek Simmons' custody, became her maternal figure, and inspired the person she wanted to become someday. Neither she or Liam mentioned Claire throughout the entire story, and her only appearance in this game is a freaking charm accessory? Why did he keep benching her for Moving on to the Ashcroft family, starting with Alyssa Ashcroft, it honestly made me sad that we barely got to see her, considering she was the reason many people got excited about this game in the first place. A lot of fans of Resident Evil Outbreak believe characters like Yoko Suzuki might also return. And given Alyssa's legacy within the franchise, I really thought she would have more screen time. With that being said, I do have to admit that she ultimately became the key to uncovering both the origins of Elpis and Spencer's change of heart, so at least she still played an important role in the narrative. On the other hand, her daughter, Grace Ashcroft, immediately captured my attention from the very moment she appeared. When Capcom introduced her during the announcement of Requiem, I was genuinely excited. Not only because, as far as I can remember, we've never had a protagonist this shy and vulnerable in Resident Evil before, but I also felt an immediate connection with her, a connection between two introverted people. It might sound strange, but since January of this year, I've been going through a personal journey trying to better understand how introverted people think. That preference of staying at home and in personal space that feels safe and peaceful instead of constantly going out. The difficulty of making friends or emotionally opening up to others. And it's not about being antisocial, it's about deeply valuing that presence of people who genuinely makes us feel safe and understood. In that sense, Grace slowly begins to find those kinds of bonds in characters like Emily and Leon. The game reflects this beautifully in the final scene, where we see her speaking to Leon without hesitation, showing that he has become someone she fully trusts. In the same way, her relationship with Emily gradually evolves throughout the story, allowing Grace to emotionally open up herself little by little as the narrative progresses. To me, Grace is one of the best written characters Capcom has ever created in this franchise in years. An introverted, fearful protagonist experiencing a real survival horror nightmare for the very first time. And I think Angela Santalvano did an excellent job bringing all of that to life. In fact, during an interview, Angela Santalvano revealed that Grace's stuttering partially came out from her own real-life anxiety while recording the role.
But when I'm nervous, I stutter a little bit. That comes out for me sometimes. And I think honestly, naturally, because the scenes were so anxiety inducing, I felt the anxiety as we were performing it, because you are putting your body through that emotion over and over again. Naturally you're gonna feel that nervous you have to kind of shake it off in between takes sometimes. And I think it just sort of kept coming up, and I didn't want to overplay it. I didn't want it to be too much. I wanted it to be real and authentic. And I have a friend who has like a real stutter, and I know when it comes up in like certain moments when they feel more anxious, when they're around people that they don't know. It kind of gets exacerbated, you know? When we did those first 1 or 2 scenes and the stutter came up, they really loved it. They felt it was like a really good representation of Grace's emotions and her emotional state in the game at the beginning of the game. And then obviously with the world that she's moving through. So it just became a part of her.
For this to be her very first video game performance, all I can say is, I really hope this isn't the last time we see her in the gaming industry. I also find it poetic that, just as Alyssa adopted Grace, Grace eventually does the same for Emily. And in a way, if you think about it, just like Grace became a source of hope for both Alyssa and Spencer, Emily ultimately became a source of hope for Grace as well. Honestly, I truly hope that this isn't the last time we see this character, whether it's in future games or maybe even one of the animated films. If there's one thing about Requiem that personally didn't work for me, it was Xeno. I genuinely don't understand why they went through the trouble of creating what is essentially a clone of our Wesker, or as Victor Gideon himself calls him,
You are nothing but an imitation.
If they barely let us fight him properly or give us any meaningful backstory. I sincerely hope that the DLC, which is apparently coming later on, gives Xeno much more context, because hyping up a character like that only to decapitate him at the end feels incredibly underwhelming. But honestly, we all know who the true villain of the game really was at the end. It wasn't Xeno, it wasn't Victor, it was this guy right here. Seriously, who throws an introvert straight to the wolves like that? Even so, I genuinely had an amazing time with Resident Evil Requiem. And I also want to take a moment to thank Capcom for 30 incredible years of this franchise. A franchise that, around 8 years ago, opened the door for me to experience something completely new. Happy birthday, Resident Evil, and here's to many more years to come. But what do you guys think about Resident Evil Requiem? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a thumbs up. And with that being said, True Warriors signing off saying, GG well played.